What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Valley coming at you with the one, the only Mort Jensen of the NBA podcast fame, Yahoo Sports fame, and Forbes fame. We are here to talk about part 1 of 2 of rebuilding teams and their futures, their overarching directions, the current as well, but mostly the futures and where they're headed, what we've seen, what we think. We begin with the Eastern Conference, but the most important question of this podcast is, Mort, how the heck are you doing?
Doing well, man. Just enjoying the fact that All-Star festivities are over. I wish I was kidding about that. I'm not.
It was the worst. The game itself was the worst presentation in all my years of covering the league since 2011. It is by far the worst I ever saw. And I don't want to make our subscribers slog through because I don't have solutions for it, to be honest. You said this and I won't say it. I'll let you say it, but I don't have answers to fix it. But I also don't know how less basketball was ever thought of as the good answer for how to fix the All-Star game. So it was, I do appreciate experimentation. So I want to acknowledge that you're going to have some whiffs, but this one felt, the presentation of it, the structure of it, it just felt incredibly tone deaf to have people sit there. And we had a breakdown in our Discord. Shout out to Mike, posted it. I think it was from Reddit. They broke down how much actual basketball was played versus tributes to TNT versus advertisements. And it's just like disgustingly low how much actual basketball.
42 minutes. 42 minutes of basketball, 80 minutes of ads. And here's the kicker. I actually got an email today from a PR firm. And they were pitching me on writing about just what a tremendous success the All-Star weekend had been. And one of the metrics that they wanted me to implement in an article was ad integration. Right, guys, because that's what fans care about. That's what I told them. No, I am not going to write that piece. It's just like, no, that's not going to happen.
How things are viewed. The fact that ranking Super Bowl ads ahead of the Super Bowl is a huge thing for us in society in America. I just find that some of the commercials are funny, but I'm like, yeah, let me just fucking sit through this ranking of ads. It's just so, but you said it, and since you didn't say now, I have no idea who they were catering to during the All-Star game. I know they've said, excuse me, or people have said this is for the kids, the youths, the people who are younger than us. Sure. I don't know. I would love to know if we have any, I don't know, Gen Zers or younger listening to this, and I know we do. Get at me and let me know whether you liked just having Mr. Beast randomly integrated into this game. What did you like about it? Did you actually like about it? They hit, miss. I'm open to any and all feedback from their alleged target audience, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah. So I have a point about that, and then we can get on with the show if that's okay. So,
no, let's move on. No,
God damn it. Well, so I've heard from the NBA itself, from many of my contacts within the league, they have this saying that the NBA is a league of lawyers, and that's never felt more appropriate than during the All-Star weekend, because it absolutely felt like a bunch of lawyers had put together a spreadsheet of a lot of people with high follower counts, and then just decided, okay, per definition, that's great, and that's why we put them in there. Completely foregoing the fact that even though Kevin Hart has a lot of followers, he's not exactly someone who caters to a young audience. I mean, even us, who's in the age group of the target audience, are a little tired of the dude. By now, a lot. I'm trying to be nice.
Even the players were tired of him. By the way, you see the clip of Jaylen Brown.
It was just over it. But here's the second part, which I think is the far more crucial point. They don't really take into account Mr. Beast's audience. They just kind of, because people don't follow Mr. Beast because he's an NBA fan. They follow Mr. Beast for what he creates. They follow him for the shows, the award money, whatever it is. So the NBA thinks, oh, this guy has X amount of followers, X amount of we'll get all of those. No, you won't. No, you won't, because you can't be guaranteed in any way, shape, or form that even 1% of his followers are interested in basketball. You're just looking at it through spreadsheet perspective. You're not doing your due diligence. And I think the league office would be so much wiser in using this All-Star weekend as motivation to get more creative types within the league office instead of just being a lot of lawyers who are doing this. So the spreadsheet tells us that this person has a lot of factors that we can eliminate. No, screw that. Put in guys who are actually telling you, oh, like we need to put this person into this event. We need to do this. We need to do that because then we cater to this segment. Now we cater to the hardcore fans. Now we cater to the kids. Because no one's doing that. I think Josh Epperly said it the best on Twitter. He said the NBA has absolutely no idea who their core audience is anymore. Like it's just lost.
I think that's fair. I don't know, and I think that's an interesting solution to have maybe more creative types in there, and also to make it easier for like the basketball sicko stuff to be found. To where I hear people complain about the way the game is covered, including some of the play or the way the game is played too. Shout out to Draymond Green for just spewing disinformation there.
Oh,
but
yeah.
They have alternatives. It's like the NBA alternative broadcasts. Those are too hard to find. Yeah. Like if you want to listen to a different type of those things. So I think there's a lot of things they could try. Like I said, I do appreciate experimentation. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't see what Josh said, but the NBA not seeming to have any idea who their caught audience is feels like sort of the best way to sum it up at this point. And look, some people don't want to talk about it or hear about it, and we're not going to spend any more time on it, but it's absolutely an issue worth discussing because they're concerned about it, and they're making the players just run through these. Kevin Durant said we should just cancel All-Star Weekend because everyone's complaining.
I agree.
Right now.
I agree.
I honestly, I would normally just say like, no, that's not the answer. But after what we just saw, like dunk contest was cool. By the way, the closest they probably came to hitting the mark, and I don't watch him enough, or I've seen like maybe one or two of his videos, but like Jesser being a judge, maybe that was egregious, but like his audience is actually interested in basketball because every video he posts is about basketball. So I'm not necessarily supporting that decision. I honestly don't really care.
I didn't know. I still don't know who that is. So like
there you go. But yes, that is like at least closer to being inside the ballpark of nice. I can see what they were thinking.
That's great. I mean, that's generally just because I don't know the guy, that just makes me uninformed. But that's great. That's genuinely great that they did, they hit 1 out of 27.
I don't even know if it was a hit, to be honest with you. I'm sure people were annoyed that he was right. So
yeah, no, to me, it's a symptom of something larger. And it's not just the All-Star game. It's again, the way that it's being covered. The TNT crew has just like, they know they're not going to come back, and they are making us all very aware of it. And they don't give a flying something anymore. And it's egregious coverage. And I think the best way to wrap this segment up before we actually get to the actual podcast is, imagine if the NFL had people covering the league talking about football in the same way that the people we have covering basketball did. Those people would be off the air in a matter of hours. And for some reason, we still give a platform to players who don't even know the names of certain players. We give platforms to players who are trying to like tear down the current league just to elevate themselves in their prior glory. Yep. Like, the MO is so obvious that it's frankly embarrassing that no one's kind of like, hey, maybe these aren't the droids you're looking for. It's like, shouldn't be hard.
I went on a little bit of a All-Star Sunday night crusade because when fans kind of say that stuff about there's too many threes, things that I objectively disagree. The game is awful. It needs certain rule changes. By the way, it does need certain rule changes. I won't dismiss what fans are saying is clearly, I mean, unless they're a-holes to me, I won't dismiss it because I think it's a symptom of the coverage you're talking about it. When I see current players, not even just former players, but current players saying that BS, that's really where it's, okay, well, now you're not even trying to like portray this in an accurate light. And so I would just strongly recommend Ben Taylor at Thinking Basketball did a video.
Yeah.
It's not condescending at all, but he went through some of the biggest gripes about today's game. And then just had a discussion about, well, could this be true? Is it not true? And then kind of showed the evidence as to why these main talking points just aren't accurate. And I think it speaks to a failure and folly in the way that the specifically the NBA is covered. And I will recognize that while people like to compare, and I'm not saying you specifically, like what the NFL is doing, that type of coverage I do think is a lot easier to turn mainstream when you have so much time in between plays, in between games. And so the NBA has a unique challenge there, but I want to also make this clear that does not excuse the state of why do fans shouldn't have to care about the number of advertisements that are being played during the NBA All-Star game. And so maybe we're foisting that on them, but when there's 80 minutes of advertisements versus 40 minutes of basketball, it deserves to be a talking point there.
Yep.
So biggest losers are probably the fans in all this, unless again, if you are what I think the NBA believes their target audience is supposed to be, and you loved the NBA All-Star game, let us know. There's our 10-minute joint diatribe on the NBA All-Star game and the state of coverage. Let's get to some rebuilding teams, Mort, is in the East. Before we dive in, is there anything that I think each team is different on a case-by-case basis, of course, but is there any sort of blanket consideration or view when you take evaluating how these teams that are focusing on the future go about their business, or how you view their current state?
Determination. Determination is the first word that comes to mind, because if you go into a full-on rebuild, you have to make sure that you do it the right way. You go through it organizationally wide, that you don't have people in the front office fighting it, that you don't have half a front office who's like, no, we don't really want to rebuild. Like, you all are on the same page. Everyone has to want to go through a rebuild, have to have the motivation to keep going when shit gets tough. My apologies for breaking out the S word there, but like,
our listeners have probably heard so much.
I know. It's
Grant.
I'm trying.
Anyone who listens knows Grant has quite a dirty vocabulary. So
Grant is just dirty in many ways. It's fine. Grant, and look.
By the way, I want to know what he thinks of your lawyer voice. Grant, as an attorney, I'd love to know what he thinks of your lawyer voice at the top of this.
I mean, look, that might actually gotten his juices flowing. So we'll see.
I think it sounds exactly like him, personally. That was just spot on. Love you, Grant. We're just kidding. Let's dive into this, though. We begin with the Brooklyn Nets, who I don't want to say it's not the most form of egregious rebuilding ever, but when you reacquire the rights to your next 2 draft picks, you know what the deal is. Before I even ask you about your overarching thoughts on them and their direction, did you see what Cam Johnson said over the past few days? It was this was via Lucas Kaplan of Nets Daily. He does a fantastic job over there. Was basically, I won't read through the whole thing because it was quite lengthy, but saying that if fans are angry at the players because they're not losing enough games, which I think you can make the case that the Nets have not lost enough games this year, that they're not real fans, and you can't expect players to be active participants in tanking. And I agree. Like, I view tanking or rebuilding like as an organizational direction, not like the players, all of them need to be on board, because this oversimplifies it. But why are we expecting Cam Johnson to contribute to what could be the Nets getting his replacement out of, or making it easier to trade him? Like, I don't understand that thought, but I do think it's interesting because we use this throwaway verbiage where they're rebuilding, they should lose more. Like, you kind of don't, or at least I'm sure I'm guilty of not giving enough credence to, like, these players are, one, they're more talented than you probably give them credit for. And two, it's like, they're not going out there trying to throw games. It's technically on the team, on the front office and or the coaching staff to put out lineups there that don't stand a chance. And if you end up winning games anyway, like the Nets have been doing that all year too. It was like, I think that contributed to them trading Dennis Schroeder and Dorian Finney-Smith so far before the trade deadline, was just, okay, like, no, we need to pull the ripcord on this. There's too much talent. Jordy Fernandez is too good of a coach. These guys are too good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I fully agree. I was actually surprised they didn't end up trading Cam as well. But I think, honestly, there was some parts of that whole thing that just got thrown out of whack because of the Luka trade as well. I think there were a couple things where the Nets were like, okay, look, we need to make sure we get our bang for the buck. But you kind of knew after what the Lakers gave up for Luka, a lot of teams were kind of being a little bit of dicks to each other. Like, oh, well, look, the Lakers gave up virtually nothing for Luka, so why should I give up anything of significant value for Cam Johnson? So I kind of get it. I think it's fine. He's still got 2 years left on his deal after this year, so like you can make a summer move there without any problem. I do want to clarify something, because I think you're absolutely right. I think Cam is absolutely right. And when I said before we started that determination needs to be organizational wide, I do think that is, excluding players and coaching staff, because I consider them to be in their own little bubble. Like, you have to have coaches and players trying to win, because like you said, that is their jobs. You're not going to find players who are going to be like, hey, look, I'm not going to put in an effort. These guys are insanely competitive. Like it's to the point where we don't necessarily comprehend it, because they wouldn't be in the NBA if they weren't. Like, these guys are sickos more than we like to call ourselves sickos. So obviously, I think it's entirely on the ownership angle and on the front office. Like, coaches, players, own little thing. That's their own little entity.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I do wonder if the Nets specifically do seem under more pressure to where they might be subjected to that type of sweeping analysis where this is not okay, because they don't have, as intriguing as Cam Johnson might be, as much as you may like some of the players on this roster, whether it's Cam Thomas or Noah Clowney or Jalen Wilson or somebody else, like, they don't have the face or their building block of the future. And so that increases the stakes of this season, specifically when it comes to their lottery odds. At the same time, though, I don't know how much worse, like, they're realistically supposed, because as of right now, they would have the sixth best lottery odds in the league as we're recording this. And it's just when you look at the teams, the 5 teams below them, Raptors, Hornets, Jazz, Pelicans, Wizards, I don't like, which of those teams are they supposed to catch? And so then I guess you would say, is their cardinal sin not having lost like early on enough? I suppose. But I'm just, what do you sort of make of all that, where they are playing this? It's a different type of high stakes game, and maybe it always is if you're kind of in year one of a retool. It's just because you don't have, like, you can't even point to someone on this team who might be their building block of the future.
It's one of those things where every single team who starts up a new season, they want to see what's actually going down. Like the Clippers, for example, is a great example of a team we all thought would be awful in many ways this year. They are not. They are actually quite good. So they rode with that whole thing. And like, if they had lived up to our expectations of being bad, we would have seen them be far more active at the deadline, presumably pivoted towards being sellers. So there are situations where if a team gets off to a start where ownership is like, oh, this might actually be good for us to win, and then we can push this whole rebuild thing down a year. I think the Nets were in one of those situations because I think they started off the year like 3-3. And so they kind of went with that. And then they didn't lose enough to a point where they were fully convinced they couldn't make a playoff push. And then suddenly the wheels kind of came off, I want to say in late December, no, mid-December maybe. And that's when I think rightly so, they pivoted, and they should. So it's the fact that they don't have that guy. It's the same situation as Portland, knowing full well that Scoot is on his way, but like, we still don't know if Scoot is that guy. It's the same thing with them. They need to find that dude within the next couple of years. Is that going to be in this draft? Who knows? Could be the next one. As long as you get as many bites of the apple as humanly possible over the next couple of years, that's all you can do, really. I mean, and then do proper scouting, of course. Like, and that's part of being determined in going into rebuild. I think if you are an NBA organization going into a rebuild and you're not investing in like a worldwide scouting staff, and you're not like expanding that staff, you're going to be in for a rough start, a rough middle, and a rough end.
I don't know if I go as far as comparing the Blazers, because at least the Blazers, you could say, you mentioned Scoot, but you could in theory say they might have 2, 3 candidates if you include Donovan Clingan and Shaden Sharp, where the Nets just don't even have.
Yeah, that's fair.
Unless you're Cam Thomas pilled, in which case I respect you. But
no, but like, though none of those 3 right now are like locked in, Luka, Giannis, Wemby types, right? Like, and
they might be closer to like, who has the, well, this isn't the Western, I was gonna say Utah. Right. This isn't the Western Conference rebuilding podcast. So we'll get to that. Have you, like, has anything stood out to you about anyone who's currently in place or just what they've done? I mean, Jordi Fernandez, they had a really good half-court offense when you gave him any sort of talent at the beginning of the year. And now, like, I think they're 11th in points allowed per possession since January 1st. Nick Claxton's done a great job on that end of the floor since around then too, as well, after like maybe not the best start. They're not getting it like super lucky when it comes to opponent shooting necessarily during that stretch. There's just anything that kind of stands out to you about their current when it comes to trying and informing their future?
Defense. I think they play on a string. I think there's a lot of cohesion there. I think they're playing for one another, which is always a sign of a good team. The problem is they can't produce on the other side of the floor, if we're looking at it through like the competitive lens, right? This is just a team where it seems like there are good vibes. They want to actually achieve something together, and it's also why it makes it hard to blow it apart. Like I've seen plenty of Nets fans actually say, "Look, like we're not winning, but I don't hate this product. Like I don't hate any of these players. It's nice to follow along. Like these are good guys. I like to watch Cam Thomas. I like to watch Cam Johnson before he was traded. Like I watch Dorian Finney-Smith, like Nick Claxton, even Ben Simmons was even beginning to get a little bit appreciated. Mm-hmm. So it's a really odd and weird dynamic of having to blow apart a team that the fan base actually likes. But I understand why they like it. This is a team that's very unselfish. They go out and put in the effort. I think they're in far more close games than what most teams realize. Like they're not a pushover. And when you're what are they right now? Like 20 and 30 something? Like
yeah, they're
34.
20 and 34, yeah.
Yeah, like you could probably like find a lot of teams who are like, oh well, like it's the fourth quarter, we're down 20, like we're not gonna fight. These guys fight all the time, and if that's not a sign of keeping on Jordi Fernandez, I don't know what it is. I mean, that's
they might have to fire him to lose enough games.
Right. God, that'd be so bad. No, this is like a huge compliment to him, I think, and for players to buy into his system and his way of looking at things. Like they found a good one on the bench there.
It does seem that way, and I would echo a lot of what you said about the way they play. If you like when you watch the Nets, like you can kind of see the effort, and at least there's, they try and offset the talent deficit. Like if they get a rebound, like they're going to try and run because they know that they just don't have, without Dennis Schroeder there, like they're not going to have someone who could manipulate the half court. They do have D'Lo, but so that I like the principles, it seems like, what Jordi has installed there. And I will, Nick Claxton, I still think some people kind of felt veered away and wonder if he was on a bad contract. I think it's an innocuous contract at worst. And that is, they have like, when you look at their front court players, they have like between him and then there's Noah Clowney, like there's like some real switchability there. So do you think, I have two questions left. Do you think that there's anyone on this team that you identify and say, okay, like they need to be here or they will be here or have a shot at being here, like over the longer term?
That's a good question. I'm hoping that there are some of the young guys who are just locked in because they don't have the trade value as players yet to fetch anything of significance. So you really have a chance to nurture their development. Like obviously Clowney, that goes without saying, Dariq Whitehead as well. I think there are these players who you need to like see properly. Can we get more out of this guy? Is there more talent to squeeze? Is there more potential to squeeze? Now, they're in a tough spot with Cam Thomas, I think, because of the restricted free agency coming up. Fortunately for them, though, that's a market, and you and I talked about this, I think, last week as well. You can pretty much squeeze your own restricted free agent a pretty fair amount nowadays. So maybe that's not going to be an issue. I actually realized something a couple days ago, that Day'Ron Sharpe is also a restricted free agent. For some reason, that just flew over my head. He's pretty good too.
Big shoulders. How could you just forget about him?
I know. And he's such a good rebounder. I actually enjoy watching him play. So they have a couple things that they need to figure out. But like if they can get those guys back on perfectly reasonable deals, yeah, absolutely. Like stay the course, because you're not in the business of just dumping talent. That'd be bad.
Nick Claxton's not a name that would stand out to you as like someone that you think would stick around. Like you view him as more of, okay, I want to say transient, but that'll be someone they eventually trade.
No, I think he's gone, not necessarily in this summer, but down the road. First and foremost, I think his value right now is the lowest it's been in a couple of years. I think his raw production has dropped off. That's unfortunate. I don't think that's going to be a sustainable thing. I think he can bounce back, and I think they're right in just waiting it out, because his contract diminishes in value every single year. So if he has a bounce back year, and like, let's say he comes into next year, he averages 14 and 11, like elite defense as usual, and we near the trade deadline, some teams looking at that contract going, okay, he's earning 25.3 million this year, and then it drops down to 23 and to 20.9. Hell yeah, let's go get that. And the Nets can sort of pick their price here. I don't think he's long for this roster in terms of like 26, 27. But you're not losing anything with him on the roster until they find the right deal.
Yeah, and you mentioned Dariq Whitehead too. I still don't have all the injuries that he's dealt with, and he has 11 career games under his belt.
Yeah.
But like there was some flashes. I think it was towards the end of January. I can't remember the game, but like to see him coming to the ball and hitting threes off the catch, or like being able to operate a little bit more methodically, get into the lane off the dribble. I'd be curious if we get like just what he could turn into, just because he was people were so high on him coming out of high school. Specifically, he was recruiting rank in 2020 was number 1. I don't think he's anywhere near like their lottery ticket, but just like there might be something there if he's able to stay healthy. Like there just might be something there.
And of course, like if they finally unleash Trenton Watford, they're going to be right in the playoff mix. They just won't for whatever reason.
Well, they're not trying to win the championship this year, and
I know
it's their answer. My final question on them, and I actually didn't think they were going to trade Cam Johnson after they traded. I guess after the Luka trade, you could have told me anything, and I would have believed. To be fair, but you look at this team; they didn't take back any long-term money this year. I think if you kind of factor in Dorian Finney-Smith's player option, they guaranteed themselves easier paths to cap space this summer. Yep. Do you view that as more just sort of when you look back on the trades and what they got, that it was out of convenience, or do you kind of look at them and say, no, I wasn't expecting them to go make, a run at Jimmy Butler had he still been a free agent, or go after James Harden again if he opts out? Like, are you kind of, I mentioned this at the time and I'm still there. Like I've just kind of circled their cap space as, okay, this team might do something weird over the summer because it feels like they actively prioritize keeping it.
Right. So I think they want to keep their options open. Remember how Sean Marks was like the biggest troll in 2016? I think it was 2016, right? When he gave the offer sheet to Alan Crabb. He gave out a ton of offer sheets.
Were they the Tyler Johnson offer sheet?
Oh, right. Yeah. And they ended up with him, right? No. Wait a second. The Miami matched and then traded for him later, or was that Crabb? Oh, God, I don't even remember.
Both. I think Tyler Johnson and Alan Crabb eventually ended up with the Nets, even though their offer sheets were matched.
Yeah. Now, see, I wouldn't be surprised if the Nets actually did something similar this time around, because they also know that the second apron stuff is real. We've seen that now, that teams are not crazy about not having that flexibility. So for them to just kind of push the price point up and maybe actually get good players in return because of it, or potentially calling up teams that are deep within the second apron after they may have realized, we can't go anywhere. Like, what are we to do? And then the Nets are like, well, we can give you immediate salary relief. Like that's a thing that exists, and it'll cost you draft picks, but we're right here for it. Like, are those teams ready to commit to such a deal? We don't know. That remains to be seen. But you can use cap space in way more ways than just as on free agents. So I'm pretty excited actually to see what Sean Marks does with this. I think I would love a return for him to just be the biggest troll. I would love that, because it forces other teams to make really uncomfortable decisions. And frankly, that's how you play the game.
I was looking at, in prep of this, like restricted free agents for this summer, and trying to fit the way you phrased it to him be a troll.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what is the name where you could just see Sean Marks throwing a mega, like not even with the intention of actually getting them, but to fuck with the other team's books. The two I came up with were Jonathan Kuminga and Santi Aldama. And Aldama, I feel like maybe that doesn't make too much sense because you have Claxton and maybe you want to keep around Sharp, but like Aldama could probably play next to either of them, but he almost feels too gettable because of how cost conscious Memphis is. But those were the two that I because I don't think it'll be Giddey. That would surprise me a little bit.
I was just about to say they should fuck with the Bulls for this because of this thing. Like the Bulls are so infatuated with saving face. This is something we know about them. They do not want to lose face. They gave up that deal. Like they gave up Caruso for Josh Giddey. They've started him all year long, despite the fact that he's not a freaking starter. He's been bad for them. They are absolutely in a tight spot when it comes to him. So it would be the funniest thing ever if Sean Marks goes out and like signs him to an offer sheet worth like $20 million a year And the Bulls are like, well, that's just low enough to the point where we can't just let him walk, because then we'll look like dumbasses, which they are, but that's a different point. They'll never want to admit that. So Sean Marks, go troll the fuck out of the Chicago Bulls.
Isn't that a bit just like stabbing someone when they're already dead, though? If you do that to the Bulls, at this point, it's let the Bulls self-sabotage. They don't need any help with it.
That's true, but it would be funny, and this is for my amusement.
Yeah, they both have like Josh Giddey and Patrick Williams for the next 4 years are making $25 million, or between them like $40 million a pop.
That'd be so bad.
This is so I think at the end we'll ask of these teams maybe who's like future would you be highest on, or like what are your vibes if we had a vibe meter of 1 to 10, what are your vibes on the Brooklyn's rebuild?
So it's so early though, right? I mean, it's like if they win the lottery and go with Cooper Flagg, I mean, the vibes instantaneously grow much more intense and higher and whatnot. But like, I do think that they have the right approach to this. So my vibes, if I'm a Nets fan, they're pretty high.
I mean, just because you don't know what's going to happen, but like you position yourself for flexibility. You have this year's pick, next year's pick. My vibes would probably be like at a 7.2. Not like astronomically high, but a 7.
And this is out of 10 because you never gave me a scale. Like if it's 7.2 out of 10 million, I wouldn't have a chance.
I had 5 scale from 1 to 10.
Oh, you did. Oh, my apologies. All right.
So I'll go 7.2. Look, now we're gonna do a vibe meter for every team.
How did you get to 0.2 though?
What's that?
How did you get to 0.2?
It's a proprietary formula, the contents of which I cannot reveal. Sorry.
Right. It's like when food bloggers go to a place, it's like, oh, this is like 4.61. Like, how the fuck did it get to that number?
So the person who wants to be super thorough in me would try and look at this in like a bunch of different categories, but I don't think it makes for necessarily good podcasting. But I kind of look at when it comes to long-term player equity, you can't have great vibes. I just don't know that they have a ton of that. But when you're looking at flexibility, coaching, and then like understanding and alignment among the front office, I really think they hit on all 3 of those boxes, which like the flexibility, they're going to have more cap space than probably the entire Western Conference. Like this one, so I just like their flexibility. And as you mentioned, and Keith Smith says this all the time, cap space is not just for free agency, but that's why I just have them circled, because you also don't have that much cap space without a reason to use it or intention of using it.
Yeah.
Are you ready to move on to our next team?
Absolutely.
The Charlotte Hornets, Mort. Where do you want to, we'll alternate here. So where do you want to take the discussion on these Hornets? Is Mark Williams still a member of the Hornets? How do we factor him in?
No. That's the thing. So that whole situation is super uncomfortable for him, and I suppose the organization too. I think it would behoove both parties to just basically say, look, like, Mark, you're staying home for the rest of the season. We have nothing to play for regardless. Like, there's no reason for you to get injured. Like, let's get you into the summer. Let's see. Then we work together on a deal from there, because like our relationship obviously can't continue after this whole debacle, which is super like unfortunate, all things considered. I keep hearing only good things about Mark as well. So yeah, that sucks. In terms of like where they have to go, I don't know, man. It's such a hard team to get smart on, because you're sort of at the whimsy of LaMelo in many ways. You're also stuck with a guy who has divided the fan base because of what he's done, obviously. You don't really have a lot of like.
What did Trey Mann do?
What did Trey Mann do?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's a good one. Outside of Brandon Miller, you really don't have, that guy yet. Maybe Salon becomes that down the line. Like maybe someone else steps up, but that seems like a stretch. So, like, what are you actually trying to do? Do you want to give LaMelo just free reign moving forward? Like, because I get the whole he's fun part, but I do think it's fair to ask, is he also like a top tier superstar? I don't think so. And I don't think he's anywhere close to it personally.
Let's actually spend a second on that then.
Great.
What do you, when you mean top tier superstar and that he's not even like, so what would be the, like, what player or player type are you comparing him to?
Right. So actually it's not really the players. What I do is I try to look at the stat lines, and I'm kind of gauging, is his numbers like more volatile than his influence. Like, because there are certain guys who are just way more influential than the numbers suggest, and vice versa. I think he's getting closer to being worth like his stat line. I've been very down on him in the past. I do think this year he's done better in many categories, but I still think he's a guy who'll put up these huge numbers without necessarily having the actual impact behind it. I think he is so unpredictable that it comes at the cost of also his teammates who are like, what the hell just happened? Like, I don't even understand. What did you just take a 37-foot pull-up shot with like 22 left on the shot clock and nobody in rebounding position? There are just there are so many small things where I'm like, if he just dialed back this, or if he just scaled up this, then we're talking about a guy who would be somewhat justified of his statistical production, at least. And I just don't think he's there yet. That's not to say that won't come, but I do think he needs a system in place where he's being reined back in the right ways. He's ultra talented. He needs a coach who understands how to maximize his effort level, his skill set, and I don't know if he has that right now.
I think that might be fair in the sense of where a lot of people look at him. The Hornets they're better with him on the floor. And when I watch them, that might have to do with the talent around him, but that's also part of it. Okay, like they're working off a low baseline without him, but that's also if your biggest look. I watch LaMelo, and there are things that I wish he did more all the time. There's like the rigid defensive stances. Like he has the tools to be way better, or I'll say more consistent than he's ever been on defense. You mentioned like putting him in kind of the right situation, and I think that really has to come down to, right, well, then improve the talent that's around him, because there is talent around him. But like Mark Williams is a perfect example. Whether you like him or think he's overrated in terms of a defensive prospect or somehow underrated there, we just haven't seen enough of him. And like you just got Brandon Miller really in the building. LaMelo's not healthy last year. Brandon Miller's not going to play again this season. It gets really, really tough to evaluate like what would he be on the like a better team, because I don't think they've given him one. And so to sit here and say the fact that he can improve the product of a let's say a bad team, I assign real value to that. And until I see him undermine what should be a winning situation, I find it really weird that like and I'm not saying this is you, but like a lot of the conversations around him just focus on like he's not a winner is basically what it boils down to. And if you look at like the quality of the talent around him in catch-all metrics per B-ball index, he's had 1 year where like he's ever had even close to an above average supporting cast around him. And even this year, they're in the 12th percentile. Last year, 8th percentile of teammate quality. So that's like, that's not everything. I want to make it clear, but I'm not here to say that I think he's on the level of Luka, or if he's on the level of Steph, or just anyone that you would build a championship contender around as just the A1. Would I rule it out? I'm probably going to be more stubborn and say, no, I won't rule it out. But like, I watch the way he plays and the stuff that he can still do away from the ball. If you put him in a situation that will have him off it more, I think that he could absolutely be the second best player on a really good team. And I think that might be why I'm probably higher on their future than a lot of other people. And even to move it away from LaMelo, because I think this is like a great point that you made. Like the word you use is situation. While the Hornets have not given him a good enough one yet, it does feel like, and please correct me if you disagree, I'll throw it to you here, this front office regime, the people who are in charge now, the only thing that I've really loathed from them is the Miles Bridges, and that's a big thing, like the way they handled it, but also then giving him that contract. I thought they had more leverage there. I don't think that's a great deal, but they understand on a basketball court. It seems like they understand the plot of what needs to happen, and they've kind of reiterated as much last year's trade deadline when you trade PJ Washington, even this year's trade deadline, like kind of taking some foresight to soak up the Yusuf Nurkic deal. Whether you thought they got enough is different, but that mindset to me is
agreed.
Okay, they get it.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. It's just, if you have the right process, but you then in the draft, for example, choose guys who may not necessarily be the best pieces to an overarching puzzle, then you kind of still fall short. Like, I'm not out on Brandon Miller whatsoever. I do wonder if he is going to be, because I said this I think last year. I was like, this guy could be the best player on the Hornets. Like, this could be the guy who could actually allow LaMelo to be that secondary guy where I think he would be unleashed in a far more effective way. But there's also an element of Brandon Miller where his amount of trigger happiness at times comes at the cost of overall team cohesion. Now, they're young, so like they have time. But LaMelo is on a big deal. He's also like one thing, by the way, that I forgot to mention about LaMelo, which is, I don't want to say it's like fully out of his control, but mostly it's out of his control. It's availability. Like injuries happen. But if you consistently miss that many games year in and year out, I'm sorry, then it just becomes one of those Embiid situations where it doesn't matter how good you are. If you can't be relied upon being healthy going into a playoff series, for example, you just automatically put a cap on your ceiling. But like Brandon Miller, to me, if he becomes a more consistent two-way player, which I think is in the cards, he's 22, right? Like something along those lines. Like I'm not out on anyone who's 22.
And I think as of now, you would remember everyone was killing them for, even with how well he's playing at the moment, like there's still a debate of, well, they should have just gone Scoot at that point. Like that wasn't even a question until Scoot started playing better. And I think the right answer would still be, no, they were right to default to Brandon Miller.
They were. I was wrong. I was wrong.
Oh, I was wrong. Me and Grant, whew, man, we've had some misses on this podcast. That was one of our bigger ones.
Look, I mean, I had misses. But by the way, when you said earlier that this wasn't coined on you, like not calling LaMelo a winner, for example, that is coined on me because I said as much last year. Last year I was like, I don't think he's a winner. I've been very harsh on him because I thought I saw someone who was tremendously undisciplined, and frankly, someone who his teammates were like, very often just the body language towards him was very dismissive, was very frustrated, where I was like, that's not great. We've seen a different version this year. We've seen players embrace him a little bit more. I do think he's going to be a guy who matures. He also needs to, because he has extremely poor habits, both on and off the court, that needs to be addressed, frankly. So maybe it's time. Maybe time is your friend here. But at the same time, you've got to pay guys. Like after this year, Brandon Miller only has 2 years left on his rookie deal. Then you've got to re-up him. So like the clock is ticking here. They need to find someone in the draft this year who just kind of, glues everything together. You know what they need? They need a Luol Deng type. That's what they need. Someone who's like not a star, who'll just come in and play effective two-way basketball. And I'm not saying like as a wing necessarily, because they have a ton of wings. Just someone who is just the glue to everything.
Yeah, I don't even know what I would identify as their biggest need. I think you can make a case that it's a long-term solution at the 5, just because it doesn't seem like it's going to be Mark Williams. But I guess I'm a little bit more optimistic about their timeline, to where I look at it as, okay, it's 2 years before Brandon Miller. You're going to extend Brandon Miller. But so it's 2 years, more years before that money kicks in. And then that's sort of, okay, then LaMelo has 2 years left on his current contract. It's like that's sort of like a nice pivot point. It seems like it aligns nicely. What's really interesting is I haven't given enough thought to this, maybe because this year's draft class has been all over the place. But do we look back at the Tijon Salon pick? Because right now, I think that dude plays insanely hard. I do not understand, or I don't have a feel for what he could be in the NBA yet at this point. And that's kind of when you're going to come out with such a high draft pick, and that's what we're going to say this far into his rookie season. I don't ever want to write off it. Like Cody Williams, I had him atop my big board. I'm not ready to write him off yet, but like what we've seen thus far, or more accurately, what we have not seen, like it is concerning. So there's definitely that level of pressure there. And I do wonder if they'll have the stomach to, because I say I'm happy that, or not happy, but they have 2 years, like before Brandon Miller's next contract is bigger. But like, you need to understand, and this is the tough part of rebuilding, okay, when is the right time to go for it? And you don't get to say that, I would say, this summer, even if you wind up with a top 5 pick, because you're, I think, projected to at this point, because you still kind of need to see, well, what does that player turn into with Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball? So they're on sort of a slippery slope, but I think the fact that even LaMelo, and we know it doesn't work like this, but he's under team control for 4 more years after this one. Brandon Miller's under team control for even longer when you factor in how these extensions work. Yeah, if they have the stomach to kind of see this through, they have a real amount of time. And I also think, to LaMelo's credit, and I agree, like there's just off-court stuff floating around out there that, he's young, but it gives you pause. It's never seemed like there's nothing, unless you've heard differently. I've never heard a thing about he wants out He's like sort of looking to leave. He's not happy here. That's a big deal.
Yep. Because it's Charlotte.
Well, but also just like, it's not even because it's Charlotte. It's this team has been, this organization, like it's lacked coherence, I would say, until recently. Right. And so you could, even if you were in, like maybe you could, if the Los Angeles Lakers were pulling this BS, okay, maybe you get away with it, but there's probably 24 franchises, if they had kind of followed the same trajectory as the Hornets since LaMelo entered the league, there's probably a ton of organizations that would then see their best player during that span would have wanted out by now, or you would have heard mumblings about it. Unless there's anything, so you mentioned Brandon Miller. Is there anything in particular about his game where you're viewing it as sort of the swing factor as he projects or doesn't project as a star?
So there's definitely a part of his current efficiency that's just, tough titties, honestly, where he's just not hitting that. I can't look, that's no, but like sometimes it's a make and miss league, right? So I'm not going to fault him. Like right now he's injured, obviously, but he's hitting like 40% from the field on the year. I don't think that's representative of who he is. He's missed a lot of open shots, at least from what I've seen. I actually haven't pulled the numbers up, but I'm pretty sure they'll back me up. I'll be a little bit surprised if they don't. That said, he's a very sneaky athletic and at 6'9", like slithery type of guy. I want to see him attack the paint a lot more. I think he gets into these, I don't know what it is, like attacking philosophies where he's like, no, my best asset is like the 3 and I just got a jacket. I wanted a little bit more nuance there. I spoke with him during the draft or before the draft in New York 2 years ago. And everything he was talking about was leadership. Like he had to play like a leader. He had to act like a leader. He had to do all these things where he had to put his best foot forward. And, I believe him, but I still need to like see it. And maybe that's a 3rd-year jump. Could be. I'm not knocking it. It could be a thing, but we need to see more. As for your Salon thing, I have a theory of how he's going to end up. Like if he's going to get a real crack. I think he's a play finisher. And I think when you try to put the ball in his hands and ask him to create, you're sort of negating what his real skill is. He, to me, seems like someone who has a really strong sense of how to be set up and how to position himself. So I would like to see him in a role where he's not being asked to create, where he's not being asked to like, from outside the 3-point line, like go do something. He needs to be someone who just kind of catches and shoots, rolls and catches and then goes straight up. He needs to be someone who's like set up 85% of the time and then just focuses on, I have to finish plays, because that's going to take offensive pressure off of Brandon Miller. It's going to make LaMelo's life a little bit easier. And I also think that's part of how you unlock LaMelo, because if there's one compliment I'll give LaMelo that I haven't paid him, his court vision is so much better than what we're seeing in terms of the raw stats production. Like that's the one area where I think he has more influence than what his line suggests. His court vision is exceptional, and he needs to utilize it way, way, way more.
Put better options around him, and I think he might. Right. I do think he's one of the best at creating like high quality shots for teammates. Like there's a real on-ball gravity to him, and like you said, the vision. I don't know if I see it with Salon the way you do, but I would probably agree that would be the most efficient path. Or okay, if he's going to be, you typically don't. Right. I'm trying to think of what would be a good example of a higher quality NBA player where like that's because the player you just described feels like they're a big, and he's not defensively. I don't think you're ever going to see him at least stably play a bunch of 5. So what is what were the pro comps for him coming out of college?
Yeah, he's like
Amari.
Play fake. You would need to add like how many inches to his vertical. I don't know if I have like a comp, but I think that is the way to use him at least. Like if he's not going to be a starter, okay, I do see a pathway for him to become like a solid rotational piece, but like you have to streamline his role significantly.
There was, I guess, the pro comp that I just Googled it, so that's not, and I'm now remembering Obi Toppin was the comp that was used for him a lot.
Also very athletic. Okay, yeah.
I guess that's sort of just play finisher though. It just feels like those guys are objectively tougher to fit into the higher level of a rotation if they're not. I don't even want to say if they're not a big man, but if they're not a really strong defender.
That's fair. That is fair. But like again, he's 19. Let's not rule that out yet. I think
that's also incredibly fair. The only other question I want to ask you about this team, unless you have anything else you want to touch upon, of course, interesting, or is it not really an interesting decision? Like they don't have a lot of tough decisions to make this offseason. Like Trey Mann going into free agency, that's someone who we haven't seen like a ton of this year because he got injured so early on. But when he came over in the trade from Oklahoma City last year, like he's shown, and including this season, like just a ton of sort of shake, some on-ball juice, some shooting. And he's been ruled out for the year because of the back injury that's going to limit him to what he played in 13 games. How do you view, I don't think there's going to be a super robust market for him, but is this someone you're Charlotte, you're looking to keep around, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because you can now squeeze his market even more, which sounds horrible. Let me utilize the fact.
Mort over here advocating the repression of the working class.
I know. I'm a total scab right now. It's horrible. No, but like that's just the nature of the NBA, right? Like that's how you negotiate. Yeah, you're gonna go to Trey Mann. Like, no, I hear you. It's just that's gonna be a thing. They're probably gonna get it back for cheap. I assume it's gonna be a short-term deal, like a 2-year or something. In
and that might benefit them if you inflate his salary for a little bit, and like then he becomes, if a trade opportunity arises.
Yeah.
So vibe meter check. What would you give the rebuilding Hornets?
6.1249.
6.1249. That feels a little low. So would you say you're higher or lower on the vibes than in Brooklyn?
I'm much lower here on the vibes. It's the Brooklyn vibes I dig. I think this team has more talent though. So like if we bake talent into the vibes section, I'll go like one full up. So 7.1. I don't even remember the
You're trolling me, but I'm going to give them an 8.4.
My God. Okay, fair enough. That's high. That's high.
There's a chance that they have. There's a chance. I'm not guaranteeing it, but they already have done the two hardest things of a rebuild, and that's get LaMelo and Brandon Miller in place.
Right.
Huge
deal. Chance you win the New York lottery too.
Well, okay, but they've also accumulated now some extra first-round draft equity moving forward, so they could be, proactive if the right trade opportunity arises.
I'm trolling you on that one. Yes. So, but I'm not that high though. I like in all legitimacy, I'm not 8.4 because again, if let's say LaMelo is just that dude who misses 40 games per year. Then what?
You've lowered me. I'll go 8.1. The injury risk with LaMelo, you know what it is?
Yeah.
You know what my rebuke is? And I want to make it clear, it's not rational or fair. Mm-hmm. People thought the same thing about Steph. We're talking ankle injuries again. And so like in the back of my head, I'll probably wait another year or two before I get really concerned about it. But that is the availability. I think people hate that argument because they feel like it's lazy, but to me, it's probably the most like salient one when it comes to LaMelo too. Right. Dude needs to play in more games for consecutive years.
Right. And look, I hope for his sake that he figures that out. I also hope for his sake, just to wrap this up, that he starts driving a little bit more carefully.
We'll move on to the next team. Your Chicago Bulls.
Now you're trolling me.
Are they even rebuilding is the question that I think we begin here with.
Based on what Arturas Karnisovas said after the trade deadline, no, because they're still trying to make the play.
That was the NBA version of we have the concepts of a plan.
Yeah.
But is there a level of you that, unless you don't consider it candor, but where him just kind of saying like, not in this exact words, but we really have no idea what the fuck is going on right now. We're trying to
he more or less said it. He said they had to use like the remaining 30 something game to figure out a plan. Like, dude, you've been there since 2020. Like, though, if you're looking at the Lonzo Ball injury and like, oh, that really threw us off. That happened in early 2022. Like, what are we doing here? It's an embarrassment. You're trolling me with this one because this used to be my former team. You're absolutely right. That's why
I didn't found the Chicago Bulls. Like, they exist. This is nothing.
I know, but like you put them on this list because we're doing a rebuilding episode, which I think it's fair to say we have no idea if they really are. We know that the Hornets are. We know that the Nets are. The Bulls are just like stuck in whatever world they seem to live in, where the only thing that matters is people showing up to the game. Like, for example, their viewerships are way, way, way down. Now, there are, granted, some issues there in terms of like availability with their new Sportsnet and whatnot, but like that's not something they care about. Allegedly, all they care about is season ticket sales, which is like a great way to measure organizational strength if you're in 1985. It's just like they're always behind the curve, and I just don't anticipate them ever being in front of it. I think if they luck out and draft Cooper Flagg, they're going to be like, look, that was our plan all along. We're going to rebuild around this guy. And you'll unfortunately find like 100,000 Chicagoans who are like, oh my God, that's a great plan. Great work, guys. Executive of the year. Which is just not the case. This team historically relies almost exclusively on luck to get out of bad situations. The Derrick Rose draft is a perfectly solid example of that. They had 1.8% chance of that becoming the first overall pick. I like Matas Buzelis. I like him. I don't think he's as good as Bulls fans are trying to hype him up as, and I think I don't even blame them. I just think they need to cling onto something for hope. And that's the guy they're like, oh, he dunks really good. That means he's going to be a good player. Okay. Like, I could see a scenario where he becomes a perfectly solid NBA player, even a two-way guy. He's got a good shot blocking rate. He's got some defensive instincts. Do I think he's going to be like a star? I'd be very, very surprised.
I think it's fair to say you don't think he'd be a star. I'm like too high on him. Is my baseline for the Bulls too low? I think he's been incredible this year. And there's some real, I know you mentioned like there's the dunks, but like there's some real just like the combination of physicality and some of the finishing on his drives, maybe not the most efficient right now. He's been better as a 3-point shooter than I expected. And I think, so the two things I think have surprised me the most about him, I didn't think he would be this, maybe the word's not ready, but disruptive already defensively. Just because I look at someone that big who plays like a wing, let's say on offense, and he's done some real big man stuff on the defensive end. Mm-hmm. And then I didn't think he was going to shoot like, or not shoot, like there's like a handle there. Maybe I just didn't watch enough of him like in preparation for the draft.
Yeah.
So I think that he has a higher ceiling than I initially anticipated. And that decision, and I would say the Lonzo Ball extension, like are two that I feel like pretty comfortable with if I'm a Bulls fan. And so like maybe that's and I was an advocate of trading Kobe White. Like you have Kobe White there and you should get a high draft pick this year. I guess I look at this team and aside from echoing a lot of the things that you've already said, you do still have to wonder if you can even talk yourself into trusting the decision-making processes here, because even the Zach LaVine trade, okay, they finally traded Zach LaVine, but it feels like they decided that having the rights to their own first-round pick that they could, if they were rebuilding properly, they could just have kept. This wasn't like the Nets and Houston situation where Houston controlled those outright. It was top 10 protected and then top 8 for 2 years. Now, I tried to rationalize it from there and by saying, well, they clearly, now this opens it up for the next 2 years. If you're a Bulls fan, that's almost terrifying because now you just trade that pick really easily. Like, do they look at it and say, okay, now we get to tank unencumbered. If we're better than expected on accident, fine. Or is it, well, now we don't have to tank. And so like, let's ratchet this up again, baby.
Look, that's the thing. You don't ever know. And while I can certainly appreciate that there's a managerial team in place that never show their hands, it's because they don't have a hand. It's because they don't have a plan. Like, you know, that saying of it's better to be quiet and to be looked like you're stupid and instead of opening your mouth and then confirming it. Like, that's
never heard of that.
Maybe that's a Danish saying.
Too much to hear that.
But that's a saying, at least over here. And basically, I think that's what AK is kind of doing. Like, he always comes off like, oh, I'm fully aware of what I'm doing. And then suddenly he'll just sit down at a draft boat or like at a podium and go, yeah, we'll find a plan. We'll have to come up with a plan and just completely blow this illusion that they know what they're doing when they clearly don't. By the way, I don't disagree with you on Buzelis. Like, I do think that he's got some pop, he's got some juice. Like, I'm not saying that he's going to be bad. I don't think he is. I think he's going to be a full-time starter. I think he's going to be a perfectly fine NBA player. I just don't see, multiple all-stars in his future. I'd love to be wrong. I would love to be wrong. That'd be amazing. But I don't necessarily think he has that game. We've been over this on Informer podcast with Kobe White. I think they messed up by not trading him before the deadline, because that would have made him eligible for one more, playoff year. For other teams that could have had him for 2 years instead of just one now. So his value is going to decline going into the summer. I don't understand why they took on the contracts of Kevin Huerter and Zach Collins. That to me still seems a little bit odd. The Lonzo Ball thing, I agree with you in principle that it wasn't the worst thing to happen, but it did came out that they had an offer on him that included a first-round pick. Now, granted, first-round picks, that can mean a lot of things. Like, is it an unprotected from a team that's in the lottery? Probably not.
And was it like part of getting Bradley Beal from Phoenix or something?
Right. Like, we don't know, right? Like, we don't know what type of first-round draft pick was available, but one was. So you're looking at that situation going, all right, is extending Lonzo and then trading him on a smaller contract better? Or, like, are we sure we can get that same offer in again? I don't know the answer to that. I probably would have opted for the safe route and then just taken on that draft pick. But that's me. That's because I want to play it safe, because I don't trust the Bulls to do anything.
That's a great segue to what I actually wanted to ask you. I actually like the deal for the reasons that I'm about to outline, but I also think everything that I'm about to throw at you, those will be sort of the cross sections of the offseason that define what is this team actually trying to do. And so if you have Lonzo on your books, and I want to make it clear, he's not the same players as any of these guys, and there are mega questions about his health.
Right.
Does it make it less likely that they're just going to let Josh Giddey bend them over a barrel somehow in restricted free agency? Because I think that the two players that I would look at leading into this offseason as, okay, what are the Bulls doing? What happens with Kobe White? If he's still on this team into next season, I would be all sorts of worried about, well, they're just going to give this guy, I'm not saying he's not worth the money, but he won't be worth the money to a team on the Bulls' trajectory, I would argue, in his next deal. But if they don't even entertain offers for him, and then if you pay Josh Giddey, like, and look, he's been fun. Like, I still don't think Josh Giddey is good. He's been hitting like 40% of his threes since January 1st. Everything that Bulls fans or anyone who's a Josh Giddey advocate will, and he's got some stands, which I guess kudos to his brand. We've seen this movie before. It never sticks, and you're never going to find out with this current iteration of the Bulls how unuseful he can be in the playoffs. Go back and watch some Oklahoma City games in the playoffs and notice maybe what's happening when he's on the floor, and more importantly, when he's not on the floor. He's been fine by his own standards, but the fact that they traded for him makes me wonder, well, how much are they going to pay him in restricted free agency? And so I'm looking at him, I'm looking at Kobe White, as the decisions they make with those two players will define their direction more, I think, than anything else. Like, maybe you could look at, well, who are they going to draft? You could look at, or will they make any other trades? But I think those two players specifically, what happens with them is what I'm watching. And so I looked at the Lonzo Ball extension, and the two things that stood out was, okay, the low number, he could fit into someone's non-tax pyramid level. And maybe that was part of the calculus for them. But I didn't actually see the report about them having a first-round pick on the table. And when they took back such bad money in the Zach LaVine trade, with it only goes out another year each, but for Zach Collins and Kevin Huerter, that's actually wild then that they wouldn't have taken that. But I also looked at it and said, does it make it less likely or even more likely that, because none of us expect them to just tell Josh Giddey to walk when you traded Alex Caruso for him, but does it give them some cover or just embolden them to not pay Josh Giddey $25-30 million a year? And I want to make this clear. You don't need to tell me what that's worth as a percentage of the salary cap, people. He's not worth it. Like, that amount of money per year. That's me maybe galaxy braining it and giving the Bulls too much credit, especially because they do different things. But those were the two kind of lenses through which I was looking at this.
Right. I hate the fact that that we sort of have to look at it through that perspective, though. Like, does this allow them? It shouldn't matter. Like, you should be able to, in a vacuum, look at Josh Giddey and go, hell no. Just no. Go away. Like, you're not a long-term piece. That should be pretty easy to identify. But with the Bulls, it's always, and you correctly outlined this, that's the way they're thinking. Like, is there a way we can sort of save face by doing A, B, and C before we do D? You can't think like that as an NBA organization. You're always going to be behind the curve, and this is what they've done for years. So, like, to your answer, yes, keeping Lonzo will, in many ways, make it easier for them to just not match an offer sheet. Like, all right, let's see if an offer sheet even comes in. I don't know what their plan is here. I don't know if they want to look at the rest of the season and then lay a plan and then go into next year thinking, well, full training camp with Kevin Huerter and Zach Collins, maybe Pat Williams like bounces back a little bit. We can be right into that 8 to 10 spot again. Like, I just can't rule it out, Dan. And we can sit here and say, well, if they do A, then that probably suggests that they're leaning towards a rebuild. But like, we thought trading Zach LaVine would be that, the smoking gun. And then AK goes out and tells the press, no, we're still trying to make the postseason.
I think you still can hold out, however scant, like, hope that is what it does signal. And they didn't trade Vooch either. I think the offseason is going to have a lot to say. I think they've bought themselves, not benefit of the doubt, but okay, let's see what happens in the offseason. My vibe meter here, my vibe check is still, because I like Buzelis, because they actually did trade Zach LaVine, it's probably a 2.8. That's inflated because of all the questions that we both, it's so ambiguous. That's a problem after all these years in some mediocrity.
I love that. Yeah.
But they have at least opened the door by trading Zach LaVine to me, saying maybe they had their revelatory come to Jesus moments and it came too late, or it should have come way sooner, but they did move him. And let's see what decisions they now make over the offseason.
So because that realization came so late, and because everything is basically always late for the Bulls, I'm also going to go with 2.8, but I'm going to go minus. I'm going to go negative 2.8 on the vibe meter here for the Bulls. I have zero faith in their ability whatsoever. It's like, what is that movie with Adam Sandler where he gives like the most stupid answer to a question, and that like
point at an Adam Sandler movie?
Huh?
Point at an Adam Sandler movie.
That's fair. That is fair. Like, no, but it's a specific movie where there's a guy who gives like, that is incorrect, and like, may God have mercy on your soul. Like, there's
Billy Madison game.
Billy Madison. There we go. That's right. That one. Like, that is how I look at the Bulls, like, perpetually whenever they do a thing. That video just plays in my head. That's the Bulls. I don't trust them to even get a draft pick right. That's where we are.
Minus 2.8. All right, I fave it. That's I think it's brutal, but it's deservedly brutal. Next up is the Detroit Pistons, who are in the playoff hunt, but this is still, you don't look at this team, what they did over the offseason, and say, okay, they've completed their rebuild.
Right.
Which by the way, that's okay. I want to make that's okay. Yep. I just think there's a negative. We celebrate the moves that teams make to enter full-blown rebuilds, but if they've been there longer than we think they should be, it has a negative connotation to it, right? The word rebuild. And so I want to make it clear, this is not us trying to, drum up Pistons futility talk. How are you feeling, or what does this season change for this team moving forward? I think is actually the biggest question.
Yeah, a lot. This team has found an identity, like, and they've done it despite a couple things. Like, I think if we were to look at the current success of this team going into this year, we would be assuming that, that Cade obviously reaching this level that he's on, that Jaden Ivey, would just be way up higher than he even is. And I think Jalen Duren, we'd be talking about him like, then he's probably taking like a Dwight leap. Jalen Duren is actually not having the best type of season for his standards. So for them to have this success while some of their young players are unavailable and have been unavailable, and with some of them not necessarily playing up to expectations, huge. That's huge because it gives them more room to improve further. Like, if everyone comes back healthy next year and are more healthy than they've been this year, if Duren is improved, if Ivy is improved, hell, if even Cade takes another step in the right direction, then who's to say this team couldn't go all in and have a top 4 seed? I can't rule that out. It's it speaks so much to the necessity of getting rid of the team that was in place last year. Like managerial wise, coaching wise, everything had to go. That was the right call. Like, I'm not crowning them yet, but I'm very optimistic about their long-term future now.
Which I think you should be. I'm curious to see how they attempt to straddle this line between. I don't think they need to come in next season or look at all the other teams and say, oh, we need to get a lot better and be that top 4 seed in the East. But it does get interesting because how do you straddle that line between giving players time and space to develop versus trying to upgrade your roster when it might take, whether it's creating cap space and using it or more likely like looking at trades. I'm just super. I don't know how they're gonna deal with it, but I think the fact that they are as good as they've been this season while sort of juggling it effectively, I think probably the two biggest questions I have for them is, do they have that final running mate for Cade already on the roster? And I don't know. Like, we're not going to see Jaden Ivey again this season, of course. I think even as he did a better job of fitting in alongside Cade, I don't know that you could have looked at his season and said, okay, he's the answer. They have Asar Thompson, who I still am just incredibly high on, and they have Ron Holland. Both of those guys have similar limitations on the offensive end, though. And so it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic continues to grow. And then you mentioned Jalen Duren. I mean, I don't know what there's definitely players who I flip-flop on a lot.
Yeah.
He is one of them. And he's probably in the 90th percentile of players that I find myself flipping on. I don't know, specifically defensively, I don't know if I view him as someone, okay, you can go ahead and just build a longer term, really good defense with him as your backline anchor. I think that is, his rim protection metrics they're fine this year. Like, he's hovering around the 60th, any way you slice it, expected field goal percentage, rim point save per 100. He's just kind of in the 60th percentile, which is meh. And is he can finish, but he's not the most efficient finisher necessarily, especially when there's other steps involved, like if he has to go through contact as an example.
Mm-hmm.
But yet,
which is wild considering how he's built, by the way.
He is massive. And so he's also still young though. So I have questions about this season has been awesome for them. And I think that you default to being incredibly high on their future. They're still flexible. They don't have a ton of extra picks, but you don't necessarily need that if you're flexible, and you have your directional pole star to me. And that is the hardest thing to do when rebuilding. And so you found him in Cade, but I think you could argue that every other spot around him is still very much TBD. And that, I don't know if it puts them in a precarious situation, but it's definitely an interesting situation.
I think it does to an extent, because obviously when you have someone like Cade who finally broke through, you're gonna need that second guy. That's like what you're searching for, like right off the bat when you realize, oh, he's him. So I do have I closed the door on Jaden? Probably not. I mean, 30 game sample size this year is not a whole lot. And I also think he kind of had basketball PTSD from last year, because God, he was jerked around on that roster to an extent that was, I mean, unprofessional, honestly. It was ridiculous how he would not get a stable role, stable minutes whatsoever. Then he got it this year, but still sort of had to I'm actually playing 30 minutes per game. That was an acclimation period as well. And then he goes down. That's just tough. So I do think it's going to be interesting to see what type of season he's going to have next year. The same with Duren. There are some teams that are more inclined to use the rookie contracts period, especially for young bigs, to basically say, look, all we need is a sign within those first 4 years to see where this guy is headed. And if the Pistons are like, okay, year 4, that's where he takes maybe a step up. They're like, yep, we're comfortable. Let's move ahead and extend him, or, while they can, then he'll have to go into restricted free agency. But you catch my drift. I think this is very much a read and react type of situation for them. I don't think they're going to go out this summer and be super aggressive. I think they'll make changes. I think they'll make moves, and I think they'll be buyers. But I don't think they're out there just like, oh yeah, we'll trade Jaden Ivey, we'll trade Jalen Duren. I think they're very much patient, and I think that patience is probably the right call at this point in time.
I could see them doing something similar, and I think they're at a different point in their phase of development, rebuilding, whatever. Something sort of like what the Toronto Raptors did, but you're not giving up a first round pick because they just don't have extras, where it's if someone has a contract they don't necessarily want or a player they don't plan on keeping long term, but it fits what the Pistons need, where it's would you do some type of structure where it's Tobias Harris plus small salary X and you're taking back CJ McCollum or something, and you're just sort of rolling over salary slot. That's just an example. I don't even know if I'm advocating for it. That feels like what they might do this offseason in addition to then bringing in, well, they might convey their pick to, but that's also what makes them interesting, by the way, is that if they send their pick to the Timberwolves, then like everything is kind of on the players already in place and then how you upgrade around them. So I agree with you that it's read and react. I'm just very curious, is the word I've been throwing around a lot during this segment. Well, how are they going to react to what they've done this year? And there's, I think JB Bickerstaff, at least for right now, seems like a really good coach, like for what they've been able to do for like really long stretches defensively this year. They're third in points allowed per possession since January 1st. I don't think you look at this roster and say that's something they should have done at any point this year. Right. So that's kudos to them and what's again in place. I think my final question here, and anything else you want to talk about, of course, who is the player aside from Cade that you are highest on long-term on the Pistons?
I'm still an Ivy guy. I buy the upside. I totally buy into that this season was just hell on him for an injury perspective. And last year was a mentally tough season to get through because it was incompetence from, the entire coaching staff and front office. So I think with him coming back next year, hopefully fully healthy, knowing that his spot is secure in the rotation, I could see him unleashing finally the torrent of offensive efficiency that we know he can provide. I'm an Ivy guy still.
I think I'm still on the Asar train there as the second most important player for them moving forward. And I think if we can get to a point where we see even more lineups that are built to have him play make out of them, and a lot of it's going to be in transition because I don't think you want to slow things down and send him ball screens and run a ton of pick and rolls necessarily. I won't rule it out, of course. I think it comes down to, and it's the same thing with Holland, like what is their range on offense? Like, does it include being able to get to mid-rangers, get up floaters, like just looking away from the basket, or will either one of them develop into a bankable three-point shooter? I don't know. But I think because of what Asar can do defensively, it makes me really excited for what he could be long-term. And I'm curious if there's that word again. I wonder who they view as the second most important player in the building. And I almost wonder if they might think it's Ron Holland just because this front office drafted him. I don't know if there's a disconnect.
That I'd be worried if they said that at least.
It could be Malik Beasley at this point. Like, how are we going to keep this guy? And by the way, they're not good enough or set enough to where you could have said, well, we're not trading players X at the deadline. But the fact that they kept him was one predictable. I think they should have, but it leads me to believe like, well, they're going to try and keep him, even though they have non-bird. I'm saying they should, but like that's another thing that's looming over this is some of their most important guys when it comes to creating the space that I think has helped Cade a ton. Tim Hardaway Jr. is a free agent. Malik Beasley is going to be a free agent. So they're a real delicate place, but I think that you can look at this organization, at least the talent there and some of the things they've done this year, at least under this front office, and say, well, I trust them to at least make decisions that might result in, a minimum of the 60th to 70th percentile outcome.
But at least Fontecchio will not be a free agent. So there we go.
Oh, it's not a team option for him? They're not just going to decline that? So what's your vibe check on the Pistons rebuild?
Oh, that's high. I'm actually going to steal your 8.4 from the Hornets and put it on Detroit.
Do I feel better about? I do feel better, but I'm going to go to 8.6 on Detroit.
Oh, wow. You're so petty. You just had to top me there. Okay. Yeah.
Where you went, would you go 8.4? Yeah. And I'm going to go 8. Well, I feel a little bit better than I do about the Hornets, even though I might feel better in aggregate. Like, I think the Pistons have a better collection of talent, but there's a chance that Detroit, when you look at their, Charlotte, when you're trying to weigh the value of their two best players, like LaMelo and Brandon Miller could end up exceeding the value of Cade plus whoever is the second best player in Detroit.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Our next team is the Toronto Raptors. Brandon Ingram's Toronto Raptors. Scotty Barnes is in Brandon Ingram's Toronto Raptors. This is Grant and I just did a breakdown of the extension Brandon Ingram signed. This team's direction is fascinating, Mort.
Yes, it is. I wrote about them over at Yahoo too, and I'm like, I'm not smart on this team at this point. I have no idea what the direction is. I think the extension was aggressive. It was very aggressive. Raptors fans, surprisingly, to me at least, were like, oh yeah, this slaps. Or I'm like, really? Like, you're okay with that? This was a guy who the Pelicans had a tough time finding a trade partner for. So for the Raptors to take him and extend him to this extent is interesting, to say the least. I thought they could have gone into this offseason and just kind of like played it out to see first, like, are you even a good fit for us? Because as I think we both agree, Ingram can be a little bit too trigger happy on the pull-up twos. And while he's up to 3-point rate this year, it's still a lot of twos. It's still a lot of mid-range areas, time spent in the mid-range area, I should say. And I don't think you get full bang for the buck playmaking wise, despite the fact that he's actually got decent reads. But my most problematic thing with this, Dan, is he's kind of occupying the spaces where both RJ Barrett and Scotty Barnes operate. So I'm like, you have 3 wings right now who sort of operate in virtually the same areas. And what exactly are you hoping to achieve from this? That's my question. I'm guessing RJ Barrett is probably going to be traded in the summer to like make room for this, but
So I wouldn't shock me if RJ Barrett is the one who gets traded. They have room to like bring back Chris Boucher, and we'll see where their draft pick lands and stay under the tax after re-signing Brandon Ingram. So it wouldn't shock me if they go into the season and see how this works. Is there a dynamic where it's RJ? RJ probably gets paid at a clip relative to the salary cap of he can come off the bench and be a 6th man type guy. Would he want that role? I'm optimistic to play devil's advocate because I have the same questions you do. But I'm optimistic to the extent of I didn't see RJ playing within the flow a lot of New York's offense when he was there. He comes to Toronto. There's more off-ball movement. They did better jobs of getting him the ball to give him or at least a more consistent job of getting him the ball in situation where he could create advantages. Because we saw some of that with RJ in those vaunted second units with New York a couple of years back. And can Brandon Ingram benefit from the same type of usage to where it feels like, anecdotally, when they were trying to use him away from the ball, it was just a lot of standstill stuff. And in Toronto, it's not going to be that. And he's actually always been, when you dig into the numbers, he's been an efficient off-ball shooter. He just doesn't take them usually in enough volume. Maybe this year and like a year, like 3, maybe when he first came to New Orleans, whatever year that was, might have been the exceptions. And so I think maybe that, and they look at that and say, we have a bunch of these like-sized guys. Emmanuel Quickly, he's been up and down since he came and not healthy, of course, but that's someone who could play off the ball really well. And to me, it feels like trying to create as many different options as possible so that Scotty Barnes is able to sort of, one, shapeshift his role, but to make things easier on him. But I don't think this isn't the surest way to do that, though. Is definitely what I agree with.
I hear you on the off-ball opportunities. That said, we've also seen reported, I think about a year ago, that the Pelicans have really tried for Ingram to embrace that role a little bit more. Like try to like encourage more pick and pops, more, running towards a certain spot on the outside, like just basically getting him more involved as an off-ball shooter, where he's just kind of been, nah, man, like I want to be on the ball. So it also comes down to him. Like that's just the thick of it. Like he has to also embrace, I'm coming into a new situation. I have to adapt to the players around me as well. I'm not coming in to be, the main guy. I am not the main attraction here. If he comes in with that mindset and he's like, no, I'm going to take over possessions again, and you're still going to see that pattern of him not taking a lot of shots off ball, then it's going to be really ugly really quickly. I'm going to be positive about it and say, I hope for the best here. I hope that Ingram, like just a change of scenery is what did it, is that's what it opens up for. But I still need to see it before I'm like fully in.
I think that's fair. I would just be surprised if, I think you mentioned the change of scenery is important, and these are definitely discussions that happened already. And there's probably even a mutual agreement where even if Brandon Ingram might view this as sort of a stopgap in his career, where it's, you come here, you look more scalable and plug and play, and it either ups your value in time for us to pay you in 2 more years when you have the player option, or if you want to go somewhere else, there'll be a market for you. So I don't want to say I expect it to work. I expect Brandon Ingram to look and play differently, willingly, relative to what he was in New Orleans. The thing that I get stuck on here with Toronto, I don't even know what the upside then becomes for this group if everything sort of pans out when you look at all the talent in place. I don't know. Is this the core that's there plus your 2025 draft pick? Is that enough to like blossom into a contender? I just don't. I still view Scotty Barnes as someone who can be like, this is an all NBA type player to me at his peak. I still view him as that. I don't view anybody else on the roster as anywhere near that. Brandon Ingram is probably to me still a fringe. If he comes in and he becomes like 3-and-D plus playmaking and like the D really holds his end of the bargain on defense, yes, he can make an all-star game in the Eastern Conference. But I think Scotty Barnes is very clearly the only all NBA type talent on this team. And so I don't really know like what the upside is there. And that might be a lack of foresight. I'm like, maybe I'm not imaginative enough. But the other thing that sort of puzzles me too is like they've chosen to, like, they're not cheap relative to a team that you would consider rebuilding. And I would argue that if they're still in this exercise this time next year, something's gone wrong, because it seems like they clearly view this as sort of a short-term layover. And okay, next year we're going to resume trying to be competitive in the East.
Yeah, well, I mean, to their credit here, or not credit, but like to their defense, the injuries were extremely devastating to start the year. Yep. Like, I mean, it was the one guy, second guy, third guy, and everyone kind of rotated in between each other with the injuries. And now it did have some silver linings. Grady Dick, for example, and Jakob Poeltl, both of whom with, increased responsibilities really rose up to the challenge. And we saw that Grady Dick was far more well-rounded in year 2 than he was in year 1. I certainly didn't expect him to. Now he's dropped back down to like 15 points a game, but there was a time he was averaging like 18, something along those lines. Even Jakob Poeltl was at like 16 and 11 or something along those lines. I mean, we saw them, feature more and was able to respond to the increased pressure. That's a good sign. So when everyone's finally back healthy fully, which most are right now, but like, again, the second half, it's beginning to get late into the season. They're 17 and 38. So like the mojo probably isn't there either. I would imagine coming into next year, full training camp, full off season, again, crossing everything I got, that they're healthy, that they will have a much, much better start than this year, because
and because we kind of haven't talked about, like, they do have just some intriguing surrounding players, where Grady Dick is one, and I would say him in the aftermath of this trade, I would argue that him and Ochai Agbaji become more important to this team because of how complementary they can be on offense. And Agbaji, of course, like, I think he'd be integral to kind of tying the perimeter defense all together, because it makes the job of Ingram, Scotty Barnes, even maybe Emmanuel quickly a little bit easier. They can throw out some really cool lineups if they keep Chris Boucher around. Jamal Shed has shown some stuff this year when he is, I'm not going to predict this, but when he is hitting his catch and shoot threes, it's just, he's shooting 38.5% on 2.5 attempts per game since January 1st from beyond the arc. What he does defensively is undeniable. And so, like, that could be huge for them. Jacoby Walter, I don't know if I like yet. Like, I've seen some offensive dynamism there. I've even seen some fight on defense. I just don't know. He's another one where I don't have a great feel for what his fit would be on a good team. But they have a lot of guys here. And I don't know if you've thought about this at all. I've almost kind of wondered, everyone's kind of focusing on, well, what does this mean with Ingram coming? What does it mean for Barrett or Quickly, even Grady Dick? I almost wonder, do you think it needs to change the direction of how they're going at the center position right now? Like, is Jakob Poeltl, because when you're looking at what Jakob Poeltl does best at both ends of the floor, is he with Ingram now here? And like, do you see this? I mentioned this to Grant already, so people listen to that episode, I apologize for repeating myself. Couldn't you see a scenario where this becomes almost an RJ Barrett or Jakob Poeltl proposition?
In terms of like relinquishing one of them?
Yeah, just like because if you're trying to view this team through its long-term fit together,
right.
I don't know. Like, I'm struggling to see, because it hasn't happened. Let's make it clear. Like, I need to see it to believe it, I guess. I just don't know if both of those guys on top of Ingram, on top of Scotty.
Okay, I got you. Yeah. But then I don't think it's going to be a Pirtle or Barrett situation is going to be just a Barrett situation because.
So you don't think they need a different type of 5 with the type of perimeter setup that they now have?
Sure, but I don't think they can get one. That's the thing, because the type of 5 they need here is someone who can space the floor. Someone like they need Rafe LaFrentz. That guy's not around anymore.
They have Chris Boucher.
Yeah, I'm not sold on that one. I'm not. I'm just not. I understand you want more movement from your 5. I definitely do. Those guys are just not widely available. Like, can they get Khalil Ware? Like, if they can, sign me the fuck up. But like, is he available? I don't think so.
No, but I'm not. So like, yeah, they need almost it would have to be these are sort of different types, but like if it was Santi Aldama or Miles Turner, like Kristaps, they need that type of big. Right. To me, that's how I look at it. Someone who gives you some stretch and is going to be a stronger rim protector than Jakob Poeltl. And I almost feel like if I was running the team, that might be something I try and harp on, which is not to say I think Jakob Poeltl's actually been a much better fit, especially on offense, than I had expected when they made that initial trade for him. But I'm wondering in the aftermath of this trade, if when everyone's healthy, if that fit is going to be exhausted. And I think I've settled on yes, but I'm open to being wrong just because we're not going to see it this year.
I mean, you might be right, but even if you are right, what I'm thinking about is, can they even upgrade that position? That's what I'm wondering.
Why couldn't they? I guess are you saying they don't have the assets, or that player type is just too hard to get?
Yeah, number 2.
Okay, I think that's fair because I basically named everybody that would fit that. I mean, there's Brook Lopez, a free agent this year.
All right, and so when he turns into dust by approximately Christmas next year.
Well, so then I will counter with this then, though, and it's kind of a similar, different structures of the roster, but it's kind of a similar thing to with New Orleans. Some of our biggest criticism. Right. It's not that you need the floor spacer next to Zion specifically. Then get someone who's just a caps lock ring protector and gives you vertical gravity, which is why Jarrett Allen was such a popular name there. It almost feels like that would be the other direction that would make more sense for Toronto to travel.
Are you trying to ship Mitchell Robinson to Toronto?
I think that no, they need someone who's healthier, and he just can't catch the ball on offense.
Right. Okay. But the theory of Mitchell Robinson.
Well, I'll say the theory of Robert Williams III, who might be.
Okay. Oh, I like that actually, because then he can also make it a little bit, so he can mimic Jakob Poeltl's playmaking in some capacity. I hear you. I still like the fact that Jakob Poeltl is like legit 7'1", though. Like Robert Williams, 6'9", 6'10". Like, I hear you, but he does have to overcome a little bit. Like, Jakob Poeltl is just an enormous human being, and sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, they're already this year. What are they, bottom 5 in defensive rebounding? So that's not, especially because Robert Williams another health risk. I was more so is there a bigger guy then that sort of fits that? Khalil Ware, yes, but that's not. He aren't trading him.
Right. I mean, they might. Look, the Mavs traded Luka Doncic. Everything is open. I'm not gonna sit here and say that the Heat are not gonna trade Khalil Ware. Maybe they can. Maybe I was being just a little bit.
Would you give up your 2025 first round pick for Walker Kessler for this team?
Oh, I think that's a little spicy. Add some protection on it. Roll it over to next year. Maybe. That's a good name though. Like that.
He's conventionally huge. Yeah.
Big time. Big time. Will fit the timeline a lot more. Yeah, I don't hate that whatsoever. The question is, like, for that pick, like right now,
you have to pay him soon too, which is also
you have to pay him, and now you have to give up like the number 5 pick currently projected at least.
What about Jay Huff? He's not a free agent, but he's under contract. He's cheap. I don't know what Memphis would want for him.
No, I have no idea either. He'd be fun because he even spaces the floor.
Yeah, he does. I mean, we've never seen it in like real volume, though.
Right. No, that's true. But we like to think so because we like Jay Huff.
Nick Claxton would be another interesting name, but to get to the money, you would have to trade Poeltl for him. So there's probably a risk there.
I mean, look, Poeltl deserves to play somewhere if it's not in Toronto. So I could see why he would not necessarily be fully satisfied with a bench role.
Honestly, forget about trades. If they used like an exception this year, to sign Clint Capella. I don't know what his market is. And so then you have just to have that, he's older. He's not what he was, but like to have that dynamic on the roster to see what it might look like if you invested more in it. Like that, and then you still have Pirtle, presumably, if you're signing.
Yeah, if you still have Pirtle, I'll do it because I don't know if you saw my facial expression. Just Clint Capella.
I'm not saying he's. I wouldn't even view. I mean, maybe I would view Nick Claxton as like a finishing piece here, but like a lot of the names we've thrown out, like if you went with Robert Williams, Mitchell Robinson, or even Mark Williams could offensively would be interesting for this team, but those are all stabs in the dark because of their health. Like those are not, we've got our big man of the future type.
So basically, we're still calling Miami about Khalil Ware is what you're saying.
And what is Miami telling you to go fuck off at that?
We tell them we'll finally acquire Dame for you.
But I guess my point was, and it's fine if you disagree. Like you don't think that there needs to be any sort of change up. No, I'm not even saying get rid of Pirtle, but a different type of 5 on this.
I wouldn't mind.
Focused on the RJ Barrett type of it all.
No, I hear you. I wouldn't mind, but again, it has to be for the right price and the right circumstances. Like, is Chris Boucher, like you brought him up yourself. He's sort of that guy a little bit, but he's
not huge.
He's not. That's the thing. And
he is still shooting like 9,000% from 3 over the past couple months, though.
Yeah. Perhaps they got enough. No, well.
Well, I do think this is. I said this in our trade deadline.
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but they can fix this problem, by the way, during the draft.
Well, they could.
Malauk, right?
I know enough about like the top 2 prospects, and that's all I got. They could fix it with Cooper Flag, maybe. Just play without a center. Would that work for you?
Cooper Flag's teammate. Come on, Malauk. 7'2", 250, is anchoring Duke's defense this year. Like, he is that type of guy you're actually talking about.
Do you think he's again not how tall is Jonathan Mobo? Like he's had some nice moments for them. I don't view him.
I want to say 6'10" or something. Let me just check.
I do think people joke 6'9" about my love for Chris Boucher, but I really do think that once they went into Brandon Ingram trade talks, it became critical for them to keep him over Kelly Olynyk, and not just because Kelly Olynyk's money for next year was probably a net negative. Like they kind of need, in theory at least, what Chris Boucher can give you given this roster now.
I don't think that's wrong.
That's all. I just wanted you to say something semi-nice about Chris Boucher. Then we can move on. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about before I ask you about the vibe check?
One small thing shouldn't take a whole lot. I think people are getting a little too critical of Emmanuel Quickley. Like he's only played 16 games this year. He's been banged up a ton. I don't think he's back to being fully healthy yet. And people are like, overpaid, one of the worst contracts in the league. And I'm just not there yet. Like maybe down the line, if he is can't prove himself to be healthy, or if an injury pattern just emerges like that, I can't get there. I still really like that dude at the PG.
I would agree with you. I don't view him. I was kind of open to it. The live dribble playmaking has never been what I think it needs to be for him to be a point guard. But I think now that you have Ingram and Barnes and Barrett, he is so perfect. Like alongside all 3 of them, 2 of them, 1 of them, whatever. I wouldn't be out on him whatsoever either. I do worry because his defense has been weird in Toronto. I've chalked it up to a lack of familiarity, not being on the court a ton since the trade. Yeah. But the hip stuff is because the way he played defense and what he did that was most valuable in New York. If there's any sort of long-term damage to kind of the hip mobility, his ability to fight through screens or disrupt away from the ball, I'd watch that. But I'm with you. I didn't even see that talk. I feel like I have not seen any strong Emmanuel Quickley takes because he's been so injured. But if that's not even the prevailing consensus, but if that's even a sentiment that's out there, I would say it's at least a year too early to have
I think so too. So I want to give Emmanuel Quickley at least a little bit of support.
This might be one of my most just teams to watch over the next 2 or 3 years. I just don't I'm so excited to see what it becomes. Vibe check, scale of 1 to 10.
5.0 because I'm so fucking confused. 5.0, middle of the pack. I have no idea.
It's interesting because I think they are, in a vacuum, the most talented team we've talked about thus far.
Yeah, that's fair.
But the direction and the fit is still kind of hazy. I'm going to go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go 6.9. 6.9. We're on to the Washington Wizards. And I'd like to remind everyone before we get started here that we're talking about rebuilding teams. We're trying to cover the entire league. So hit that sub button if you've not already. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, the NBA podcast as well. These exercises are fun, but if you want to hear more about teams that most people aren't talking about at the moment, subscribe to Mort and HardwoodKnocks. Mort and the NBA podcast, as well as HardwoodKnocks, so that we can continue to pump out content like this. And with that said, the Washington Wizards, Mort, do we just want to give them a vibe check of an 11 and move forward?
Pretty much. No, I mean, look, this is a team that I think they're doing everything they need to be doing. They're acquiring additional draft picks. They have a lot of young guys. They're flanking them with veterans who, for the most part, should be good teachers. Do I think they've gone a little overboard with the amount of veterans they have currently on their roster? Yes, I do. But look, that's not going to be a long-term issue. Malcolm Brogdon's going to come off the books this year. So it's not necessarily something that's a major problem. I just think they're playing it smart. I think they're playing it the right way with patience. Keep Justin Champagnie is kind of my point. Keep him around. Keep him around. He's too good to just be a two-way guy. Like, let's make sure we lock his ass up.
Yeah, I agree with the Champagne. People think we're kidding. Like, the Champagnies have turned into excellent glue guys, and not even gluey stick guys. Like Grant and I, that's like a cut below where it's like the glue sticks that don't really have as strong of an adhesive. So with the Wizards, it's fascinating because I think that they're still so early in the process, but it feels like much longer because of they kind of went through their Chicago Bulls era of just like the path to nowhere. And so it's almost like Portland with Dame, though. You mentioned his name before, where it feels like their rebuild is older because of kind of like the 2 or 3 years that they spent with him where they didn't level up. Now, I guess the problem with them is similar to the problem that we talked about with, like, as the overarching problem, as we talked about at the top of this with Brooklyn, except they have players who might identify as, oh, this is our guiding light moving forward. I think it comes down to, unless you want to add anyone there, it's Alex Sarr or Bilal Coulibaly. I don't think it's like those would be the only two candidates.
Like Bob Carrington is doing something that I'm finding interesting, but I'm not there where I'm like putting him on that same level yet, but I'm also not closing that door entirely.
That's fair. I really like him. I think the poise he has on the ball and his positional size, I think the shooting is going to be fine. The lack of rim pressure is a concern, but if you can get to your mid-range spots, if you can hit threes and you could be a good passer, I think he's going to be really good. A Coulibaly, I still don't necessarily know what's going to be the best offensive wheelhouse for him. He can really finish through contact still. They've experimented with some self-creation. There's probably room for him to do more of that, but he's just not efficient in those situations. Big believer in what he can do defensively. I think if we fast forward 3 to 4 years, I would be mildly surprised if he's not kind of mentioned in some just, even if it's peripheral, all defense conversations. Right. And I've come to really like Alex Sarr. I wasn't big on him coming out of the draft. Has shown that he has 3-point touch, has shown that what he can do defensively, has shown that there's passing there. Yep. I think he's now their highest upside play. They don't have any definitives, of course, but I think they're early on enough that it's okay. And even just like getting someone, I like Keyshawn George still too.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say I do too, but it's pretty clear that I like the fact that he's accepted his role. George, I mean, just like he knows I'm a 3-point gunner and that's kind of it. That was the same in college. I do wonder if there's more to him. Like, is the defense going to, be attached to that down the line? Like, he's right now, I'm considering him primarily a one-trick pony. Whereas I think the rest of the guys that you just kind of outlined at least has, a little bit more elements to play off of.
He, I said glue guy before, but he kind of feels like he will be a jack of few or all trades and sort of a master of none. I think there's definitely more ball skills to him on offense. His size on defense right now, size and effort, I think go a long way, but he's going to probably have to get smarter and more disruptive and be able to handle some even tougher assignments. But like, that's like when you got him, you weren't looking at, okay, we need some, like, that's who you get.
No. Yeah. Coulibaly, by the way, is the guy before you, like, because you were like Coulibaly and Sarr, you had those two like same.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think it's Coulibaly.
I do think he has I've been anyone who's listening to this knows that I'm a big like Koulibaly guy, but do you think that he has the offensive chops to be the player around whom you are structuring everything?
No, so this to me reminds me a little bit of a Scotty Barnes situation where he's not going to be like your primary offensive scorer. He's not going to be the guy who's going to go out and get you necessarily 25, 30 points every single game. Like, that said, the night is young. The guy is just 20 years old. He's in his second NBA season, and I actually think, offensively speaking, he's doing pretty damn well. I know the efficiency is not there, but his feel for the offensive game, it's there. He's able to get to the free throw line. He does have a touch. It's just a question of reps. It's a question of him just having to understand how to be more efficient. I'm just, I have a hard time with people basically saying, oh, year two, he should be so much better. He's 20. He's 20 years old. Like, relax.
Well, I think it's also just, I tend to throw out efficiency for like at least the first 2 years of the career and kind of look at more of the function. And there are moments when I see it from him, and I don't know if it's an issue of, well, should they be trying him out in this situation in higher volume? So maybe it's not seen enough of it yet, even now that we're more than a year and a half into his career. To be the guy, to me, you need to either like have the sort of trademark offensive skill that you can spearhead it. And maybe Alex Sarr doesn't profile as that either, which is why it's sort of like between the two, but he feels more anomalous offensively for his player, like for his position.
It's funny, right? Because both of them have this thing where their defense is so far ahead of their offense. So we judge them currently primarily on what they do well, because that's human nature. And so we're looking at the defense and we're kind of going, oh, right, do we need something else here? Like, how are we projecting the other side of the court to project or to progress? So it's interesting. I think for me, we just have to, like you said, give it a couple of years to see how they develop offensively. I do think another element to all this that we're kind of forgetting is that they don't have a lot of reliable offensive players around them to sort of lean on. Like Jordan Poole, with all due respect to his 21 points per game, still not always the most efficient scorer in the NBA. So you're looking at guys who are not capable of carrying an entire offense on their shoulders for long stretches. That forces Koulibaly, that forces Sarr, forces sometimes Keyshawn George, so also, and Bob Carrington into situations where they're sort of forced to being a little bit low volume. I would love for them to go out in the draft. They have their pick, right? Now I'm not about.
Yeah. Well, they technically don't, but it's protected to hell and back. So yes, they do.
Right? Yeah. So they do. Yeah. And they're so bad, it's not going to convey. All right. So they have their own pick. If they, unless of course they win the lottery and it's Cooper Flag, if they get a chance of a guy where it makes sense draft slot wise, who's just a bucket getter, go that route, because that's what you need on this team. You need someone who can just fill up the damn cup, because that's going to elevate the play of Koulibaly, of Sarr, of Carrington, of George. That's going to give them something to lean on. It's going to help turn those guys into more efficient versions of themselves. So I think this is a roster issue more than anything.
And do you think that was probably the general idea they were thinking when it was, okay, you have Jordan Poole, so recently you had Kyle Kuzma, and you have Malcolm Brogdon. It seems like they were trying to set up that type of environment for their, and by the way, to an extent, I think it is worked like with Alex Sarr specifically, the strides he's made on offense, I think it's helped him for sure. But I don't know that they've necessarily succeeded, because you even said like they might have too many veterans on the roster. And I think that's certainly true for when you're looking at it as, was it supposed to lead to X? And it clearly has not, but it also hasn't. It doesn't seem like it's harshed the vibes, the word we're using. It definitely has not hurt the tank. And I think I'm also, when we're talking about the draft, and look, the lottery, they're gonna have the best lottery odds in the league. So like they'll be a bottom 4 team. And right now I think they are the worst team as we're recording this. I don't even think is anyone going to catch the Wizards? No, the Jazz are 3 losses. The Pelicans, are 3 losses better than them. So the Wizards will have the worst record, which is just akin to having top 4 lottery odds. I'm curious, just like what happens over the offseason outside of the draft for them, because you have Smart, Brogdon's a free agent. You still have Jordan Poole, the light, like you could see the light at the end of the tunnel for his contract. And I'm also, one of the things I look at too is like, what is Middleton going to do with his player option?
Pick it up.
So if he picks it up, I think that's someone they could probably trade for like actual value if he's healthy.
I wouldn't.
You just said they have too many veterans.
Yeah, that's not the guy I was referring to. That's a good ass veteran. Like Marcus Smart is not available anymore. Marcus Smart is cooked.
I think you can. Well, if you're basing it in availability, you can say similar things about Chris Middleton at this stage too.
You can say that, sure, but at least when Chris Middleton's playing, he's still efficient. He's still a playmaker. His game is still wrapped in high IQ plays, like every single time he's on the floor. I would 10 times out of 10, even in the current state of Chris Middleton, take him over Marcus Smart.
Oh, I would have taken him over Kyle Kuzma, to be clear.
Right.
They did.
Yeah, same. Same.
It's interesting with him because are they going to I want to know how willing is he to play for them and be, where is this going to have to be sort of a tacit agreement of, all right, he's opted in and you're going to come play your ass off for a half a season, rebuild your value, help the guys around us, and then we'll move you to a contender. That might be the best course for both parties.
Yep. And frankly, I think Chris, from everything I've heard from like about him and like just when the way he speaks, he seems to be, the best type of adult in the room that you can ask for.
Well, didn't they give him and Marcus Smart time, basically like mental health weeks to cope with the fact of being traded to the Wizards? Isn't that what actually happened or something like that? So maybe he's wrapped his head around it.
Right.
Understand what's going to happen moving forward.
By the way, speaking of Sarr, I want to get into this because I don't want to forget it. I'm a little pissed at Washington's guards throughout this course of the year. Even Malcolm Brogdon, who usually my opinion of him is super, super high. They have not been good enough to give Sarr the ball in advantageous positions. Like Sarr is actually pretty good at identifying when to like duck in or when to cut to the basket, especially on fast breaks. And there is a lot of like guard reluctance to giving up the ball when he's clearly a lob threat or when he's like in the dunker spot. He's being ignored in a way that I think is unreasonable. Like, I'm not saying it's intentional. I'm not sitting here and saying, oh, Alex Sarr would be like, A, B, and C. He's still super inefficient, and also because he loves to take shots like from the outside, perhaps too many. But there are at least 2 or 3 times every single game that I watched him where you're like, what are you guys doing? Like if it's Bob Carrington, if it's Jordan Poole, it's Brogdon, whoever, who just failed to see this 7-1 guy standing below the rim or even jumping up over the rim, ready to catch a lob. And they're just like, no, I'm going to go in for a contested layup. Jesus. Like that to me is kind of concerning that we're like, I noticed it pretty early in the season and like how many games have they played? Like 54. We're 54 games into the season and we're still seeing this. Like that's annoying. Like Brian Keefe, get it together, man. Like tell your guards off.
Sure. Do you think that any of them have the talent to do like that? Like none of that of any player on this roster, I would argue, no one is like an above average lob pass thrower or creator.
We're talking about short lob. Like Dan, you could make those passes.
Whoa. I don't pass. I get buckets. I miss buckets.
All right. Well, Grant can make those passes. These are not, court vision like Rashawn Rondo or Jason Kidd type of passes that I'm seeking here. I'm seeking like fairly simplistic dump offs or like Malcolm Brogdon being literally 8 feet from the basket and just like not realizing Alex Sarr is right there. It's just going into the second half of the season. That is like a major, major driver that I'm looking for. Like, I hope the entire coaching staff is like on this and actually kind of going into the second half, telling their guards, just look for the big fella at least. Just recognize his presence because he's losing out on, I think, a solid like 2 to 4 points every single game just by being looked off. And I'm at that point now where it just feels weird.
I think the last thing, at least I want to talk about with regard to this team is what do you make of the vision, the front office execution, or what they've been doing since we've seen, the Michael Winger era, Will Dawkins era, like since their takeover?
I mean, again, they've done it the right way, I think.
You said that already? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
No. I mean, I just basically said, I started by saying that I think they've done the right thing by accumulating draft picks and also pairing, veterans with the young guys. So I think it's pretty solid. I mean, it's not. It sounds
I don't
harsh.
think they've made. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just about to say it's not necessarily their fault that this might be the worst offensive roster that we've seen over the past 5 years. Like, there are a lot of kids on this team, and there are a lot of veterans who are injured. And then you throw Jordan Poole into the mix. Like,
he's been good this year for the most part, though.
For the most part, it's fine. 41.8% from the field. Yes,
I think the biggest compliment you could give them is they haven't done. I don't know if anything they've done has been like an incredible hit. I like a lot of the young guys, but we kind of need to let that marinate over the next few years. They haven't done anything that's irreversibly wrong. I think their biggest misstep, which speaks to how I think coherent their vision is, they held on to Kyle Kuzma too long for his trade value. And that's just like, all right, but they didn't try to hold on to him even longer to correct that value. They ended up trading for him for someone who in Chris Middleton might get them some assets on the way out, but might be a better guy to have around. I mean, you're talking about getting a bucket getter. This is Chris Middleton, who's a better passer than Kyle Kuzma, a better shot maker than Kyle Kuzma, and someone who's going to play more within the flow of an offense than even peak Kyle Kuzma. If, again, he's going to be with the Wizards for more than a brief spell. So I think this front office gets it. Of the teams we've talked about in the East, I guess Toronto's front office with Masai is taking risks, but you understand, maybe you don't understand the end game, but they're all defensible. Of the teams we talked about, Chicago's front office is really the only one that might not understand where it's headed or what it's even trying to do.
Yeah.
Vibe check on the Wizards rebuild, Mort.
8.
Ooh, this is the first team I think that you're higher on than I am. I'm gonna go 7.5, 7.5 there.
Well, not too far off. That's fair.
No, I think people could criticize that they haven't maybe hit any home runs yet, but I think that they have a bunch of guys who at minimum are going to be really good NBA players, even if they haven't found their, and it's okay to say maybe they don't have their best player of the future on the roster. You know why? They're not winning enough to be in a situation where they won't still have a chance of drafting that player, this year being the perfect example of that.
One final question to wrap up, the Wizards, something I just thought of right now. What is the draft pick that the Spurs would have to win either through their own or if the Atlanta pick goes into the lottery for the Wizards to accept a Spurs pick for Bilal Coulibaly trade? How high does that pick need to be?
Oh man, I don't know. I think if the Spurs if they had in this draft, if they had 7 or higher and you offered it to the Wizards, you have to think about that, right? As the Wizards.
Yeah, I might actually be a little bit more 5 and higher. I think really highly of Coulibaly. So I'm I think it's really hard to pinpoint. That's why I'm asking you, because I don't have
objectively bizarre if the Spurs made the De'Aaron Fox trade, but then also they made that Rob Dillingham trade last year, but then they turned around and they're trading for they'd be trading a pick for a prospect who's 2 years in, but the Spurs' order of operations at that point would be mind melting. I wouldn't
the reason I'm thinking about it is because that's a team we're going to talk about them in the next pod, but you and I have also talked about before that they need probably a wing moving forward. Well, what is Bilal Coulibaly? Right there, right? He would kind of fit into the things pretty easily.
I would be concerned, though, now you have shooting deficits at a lot of positions as of now, where it's, what is Stefan Castle? What is Jeremy Sohan? What is Bilal Coulibaly? There's some deficits there.
But you still have Julian Champagny.
And that's all that. Can you get what's the pick you'd be willing to give up, or as the Wizards, how high of a pick do you need to get Justin Champagny out of Washington?
Oh, yeah, that's a good.
Are we thinking number 2 overall or higher?
Yeah,
or number 1?
Not flag, nothing short of flag.
Mort, you have anything else that you want to discuss, or do you just want to tell our fine listeners and subscribers where they can find you and all the fantastic work? That you're also telling your subscribers this, so that's just as
indeed important. Yes. So you can find my work over at the NBA podcast, where you feature quite a bunch. Like we're doing these crossover episodes. You can also find my work over at Yahoo Sports, at Forbes. I'm taking a little bit of a break from the SI right now. If you speak Danish, you'll be able to catch me over at Buzzer Beater. And while we're at it, if you're interested in getting like dinner boxes from HelloFresh, you can actually use the code that I use on my Danish podcast. That works globally. You just have to go to hellofresh.com/buzzerbeater and type in the promo code buzzerbeater in one word, and that will give you a major percentage off your first purchase.
Can you get them to change it to /OnlyFans as your promo code?
I will try.
Now, does it work? It works globally. Does it work intergalactically? Just for Wemby's like home.
I should hope so, because Wemby's family out there in the great beyond will actually deserve to get like just delivered a food box, because I'm sure they're busy.
And now, are you ready to close? What is the Danish word that I'm going to be warning? I know Solaplex and Nilasux.
Oh, that was really good. The first one is Solbriller.
Solbriller?
Yeah.
Okay, that means sunglasses, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And Nilasux is scissors or clippers?
Nail clippers, specifically.
Nail clippers. Yes. That's like the super
nail clippers. And yes, so I planned this a little bit ahead because you're always wearing a cap. So let's get that one out of the way. Kisket.
Kisket?
Kisket.
Casket. Sounds like casket. Am I saying?
It almost sounds like casket. Yeah, casket. It's the E sound at the end. You have to put emphasis on. Casket.
Casket. This is casket.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. That was good. Loved it.
Casket. So I know 3 words, or I guess 2, because I pronounced the Solaplex. What is it?
Solbrella.
Solbrella. Okay. We're just have to see how many of these I remember. I feel like the one you thought was really hard, I'm going to remember Nilasux till the end of time.
That was actually the one that I was most worried about. You're absolutely right. You're doing a good job.
Mort, this was great. Until next time, we leave everybody with the shout out to the one, the only, another player the Spurs should probably figure out a way to acquire if they're going to go get Bilal Koulibaly to pair with Wemby, Mr. Frank Ntilikina.